Hello, and by the way, today we are doing r/ProRevenge. This first post is by Distortion. 2020 was an awful year for me. Among many other things, I was fired by the place I worked at for over 3 years. It was not a nice, fancy job by any means. I was just a store manager at a small business that was still run like a mom and pop shop, despite the owner not living close enough for it to truly be mom and pop run. To compensate for not being able to be in each store every day, the owner insisted on getting updates from every store 3 times per day. As you would expect, while the business grew to about 17 locations across many states, the owner could never remember who said what or what was even said. It became too much for the owner, which created a lot of miscommunication issues within the company. Every manager was having to deal with this, but it was a bit tougher for locations like mine because we were slower. So the owner didn't care about our store as much unless they were pissed. They didn't have to be pissed at me, but if I was next on the phone, I was absolutely screwed. I could outperform our goal, and it still wasn't good enough. Not an exaggeration, as it happened many times. It had been this way forever, but it got especially bad leading up to me getting fired because of new hires screwing up at multiple different locations. So, for nothing but poor timing, multiple other managers and I found ourselves on thin ice, even though we did not house any of these new hires. The owner during the pandemic was constantly bragging about how the business was doing even better actually this past year than any other. But then, a week after their latest brag, they informed me that I would be taking a pay cut to match the other store managers for the week I had just worked. Illegal to cut my pay after I had already worked it, and going forward. Naturally, I asked why, as I created their website or online store and was doing all website work for them, which is what led to my pay raise. When I asked, the owner made excuses saying that it's not fair that I get paid more than other managers, so I reminded them that I'm doing more work than the other managers. They then make an excuse and say that it's because of COVID-19. So they can't afford my wage. I reminded them about the constant emails about how we are outperforming last year and that I'm already taking a pay cut because my hours have gone down due to curfews. They got frustrated and said, "Why are you arguing with me? You'll get paid the same as other managers." I frustratedly said, "Fine, but I'm not doing the website if I'm not getting paid for it." After this, the owner got pissed and, long story short, fired me. My financial security went out the window, and I was panicking to make it through and barely did. Until these past few weeks, I had only $30 to my name outside of money for rent, and I was barely scraping by because of the groceries and other bills. My direct superior was furious with the owner and defended me, which almost cost them their job as well. Fast forward to when this happened. I get another email reminding me that the domain name that the owner purchased expires today, and that if I want to keep it, I have to pay. Now let me clear something up before I go forward. I transferred everything to them when I was fired. I left trying to hold my dignity and did not make a scene. I sent every piece of info to them over email, recommended they change all passwords after my departure, and tried to send over the domain ownerships to their company account. The owner refused to make an account and take ownership for the domain name, and refused to let it be held by the admin account made for the company because multiple people access that. Eventually I gave up. The owner has been paying for this domain with their card, but on my account forwarding the traffic to their host. Well, their card expired and could not auto-renew their domain name for 2021. Until now, I decided I would never mess with it, but now that it's back to being available for purchase to the public, my friends and I bought it together for a good laugh and a big middle finger to the up-and-coming business. Well, after a few drinks and a late night, I made the worst website that is honestly just one massive crap post and then gave it to the domain name. So now, the domain name that is on all of their business cards, social media accounts, emails, and business transactions with suppliers lead to a super, but safe for work, unprofessional website that has the crappiest content and worst layout possible. No names were trademarked. It is not for commercial use, even if it was trademarked. And I signed nothing when I made it for them. We all had a great laugh before I crashed that night. The DNS traffic stopped forwarding to their host when I woke up the next day and now points to my abomination of a website and they still have yet to notice. It's still on all their social media. If my guess is correct, they won't find out until a distributor points it out to them. They check our website frequently to make sure it is quality, else they don't want their product sold on the website and may stop selling to the company. Too long, didn't read. Owner of the company fires me and refuses to take ownership of the website domain name. My friends and I buy it once it expires and point all traffic to an awful website we made. They now advertise our site for free on all their social media, business cards, and more. This next post is by Mercury for Real. Back in the early 90s, my friend, I'll call him Lou because that is his name, was selling his RX-7 via an ad in the old print auto trader. It came out every Thursday, so that first weekend was critical for sales. The very first guy that came to see it on Saturday said he wanted to buy it after driving it. Of course, he had to finance, so they couldn't finish the sale during the weekend. Lou was worried about losing all the bites from the new ad, so he asked for a deposit of $500. The guy wrote a check. Lou told the rest of the callers that weekend that it was sold and, unfortunately, didn't ask for their numbers in case it fell through. This story predates caller ID availability in my area by a couple of years, so those leads were gone. As you surely expect by now, the guy flakes on Monday and Lou deposits the check. Payment stopped. Big surprise. Sitting around my apartment, we schemed revenge, but all we had to go on was the check. Lucky for karma, there was a phone number printed on it. Our first idea was to write a little program to dial his number repeatedly from my modem, but that would be easily stopped and probably get us in direct trouble. Then Lou got a page from his work. This was back in the one-way pager days. You call the pager's dedicated phone number, it sounds a tone, then you punch digits for the number you want to be sent to the pager. The person with the pager receives the number you entered and presumably calls it. Everyone with a pager made sure that people who needed to get a hold of them had the number for their pager. You'd see pager numbers in print and TV ads all the time for various services. Boom! Angelic choir sings, heavenly lights go off. Lou's pager number and my pager number had the same prefix, the middle 3 digits. What if we randomly dial numbers with that prefix and page them all to this guy's number? So we order a pizza, open some beers, and start looking through the yellow pages at locksmiths and tow truck services to find more pager prefixes. We wind up with a dozen or so. After that, it's half an hour of coding in ye olde Borland C++. I put together a program that would cycle through our list of known prefixes and add a random final 4 digits to get a random pager. It calls the pager's number, pauses, then dials this butthole's number and throws a *911 suffix on there for good measure, which is something people with pagers understood to indicate an emergency of some kind. The whole thing was just generating a string like ATDT602XXXYYYY butthole's number *911 hash, where XXX is the pager prefix and YYYY is random. Commas make pauses, since you need to connect to the paging service before you can enter the message. Make string, send to modem, wait for no carrier, hang up and repeat. We start eating the pizza and let it fly. I was very picky about my devices, so my modem was a US Robotics Courier. You could set an S register to control how long it would sound each tone when dialing. Uber nerds like myself would keep tinkering with that to get it as fast as possible while still being recognized by the phone service. It was very fast. I swag it could run through 4 pages per minute, so this guy would get 250 calls an hour. We just watched it run and laughed our butts off. We realized pretty early on that we didn't really know if it was working, so we wandered down to the 7-Eleven and called him from a payphone, just in case he could somehow trace it or the popo were on the case and watching. A man answered and I said, "Hello, I got a page at this number." I heard an audible sigh and then he just hangs up. Gold. We end up running it for a few hours, then let it go quiet for a few days. Then we scheduled it to start dialing in the middle of the night every few days. Plus we'd fire it up by hand randomly whenever we had a party. We checked again from the 7-Eleven after a week and it went to an answering machine. which did the rapid tone at the end of the greeting to indicate the tape was full. We reasoned that the line was still ringing. Anyway, so we kept at it for another month or so. Eventually, we got the disconnected warning when we made one of our regular checkups. I'm sure he just changed the number. I like to think about that guy answering the phone after a few days of silence when we started it up. I can vividly imagine his response at the "Did someone page me to this number?" as he slams the phone down and then it rings again a few seconds later. Or, of course, coming home from work and having an answering machine full of random people asking about being paged. And yeah, we annoyed several thousand people into calling this guy by the end, but each of those people was only put out for a single call. A cost, yes, but a necessary one for justice. This next post is by Chicken Fashion Show. To start, I bought a house with the intention of doing a flip. When I moved in, the self-appointed block captain let me know who they were the first day. Sadly, they were my next door neighbors. I tried to be friendly, but listening to them I realized how horrible they were and tried to still be civil. My significant other kept saying, "Just wait for it to be out." They bragged about their contacts with the city, forcing people to make improvements on their houses, getting undesirable renters out of the houses, and just harassing people in general. As I worked on flipping my house, the wife became a worse thorn in my side. To start, she demanded I put up a fence so people would quit cutting through my yard and scaring her. Then her and the husband demanded I take care of the weeds in the yard, or they will do it and bill me. During a storm, a tree scraped their shingles and they asked for $1,200 to replace them. The tree was there before I moved in, and by co-ed, they are responsible to cut back the branches to the property line. When I wouldn't pay, they had a relative jump my fence and cut the trees down. Needless to say, I began to ignore them, so she became a constant gnat and moved on to another target. Then, one day, as I was tearing down my deck for a patio, I realized she had put a feral cat colony on a section of my property. I had wondered why all the stray cats were around, and I finally found out. I reached out to the city and demanded it to be removed, but they said she followed the law on getting it in place. As I tried to get it shut down, she began unhinged behavior, from standing in her windows staring at me, yelling out the windows at me, and hitting the fence with items to scare my dog. Here, my revenge started. I started by filing an HRO, or harassment restraining order, against the wife and had it granted ex parte with the evidence I provided. Of course she contested it, as it was defamatory to her character. Before the hearing, the husband tried to physically intimidate me, so I filed one against him and it was also granted ex parte. In the hearing, it came up that there was an HRO against the husband as well. They dodged being served until I had it published as a means of service. I started to make complaints about them and their house. Also, I made police calls when necessary. As I did this, the other neighbors began to realize they could do to them what they had done to them and others. For example, as I was having my front door replaced, needing a building work permit, I knew they were doing internal remodeling, so I called the city inspector and they were fined for not having a permit. As she ranted at the inspector, he looked at my window and saw I had mine displayed. Their back porch became hoarded, so I made another call to a city inspector and they had to clear it out. Then they had a broken window on the porch door, so I called an inspector and they had to replace the door. Next, the paint on their house was peeling, so I called an inspector and they had to repaint. The inspector also found the wood underneath was rotted, along with their front porch, which was also sloping. So they needed to fix the front porch section of wood and repaint. Through all this, they had up cameras to prove they were not doing the things I said, i.e. hitting the fence. They also pointed a camera at my backyard. As it was legal to point a camera into my yard, and part of my HRO was her intrusive watching behaviors, I gave the camera the middle finger on my way to and from my garage. When she complained, with the city tiring of her, their response was she was admitting to intrusively watching me. The fight over the cat colony came to an end when I realized one of the cats had a serious disease and I began to capture them and turn them into animal control. Don't worry, animal control was part of the feral cat program, so they would not be put down, but the neighbor would have to pay a fine to get each cat out or have the colony closed. Finally, I caught the sick one and it had rabies. Part of the program was for her to capture each new cat and have it vaccinated, something she admitted to willingly not doing on her GoFundMe for the colony. I soon had the GoFundMe shut down when I provided the evidence she was not using the funds as she stated they were going to be used for. The city now had to act to close the colony. The person at Animal Control who wouldn't respond to my complaints was fired. The neighbors called in a city mediator who we met with and presented all the evidence and said we would not be meeting with them, and provided extremely racist tweets they made about the neighbors. The city cut ties with them as community leaders. With their power to bully gone and having spent what I can only imagine in fines and repairs, like they did to numerous other neighbors, after 14 years they sold their house and moved out, way out to the suburbs where they only have one neighbor about 50 yards away. They knew I was wrapping up my flip and would be out in less than a year. Without being able to bully their neighbors, with people having their back, they seemed to have no further reason to stay. Needless to say, I did several more things to wear them down. Finally, when I listed my house, it was sold while theirs was still on the market. As a final FU to them, I reported to the county they had both the new and old house listed as their homestead, meaning they were paying less in property taxes, so they got hit in with more fines on my way out. I like this comment by Marshall Mello. You flipped the house, you flipped them off, and you flipped the tables on them. What didn't you flip? And this comment by Dr. Farron. Nah, even Maybelline doesn't have the power for this hair flip. If you want more stories like this and other Reddit related shenanigans, be sure to hit that subscribe button.